We've all sat down at our kit at some point or another and gone, nothing feels right. Why does this kit feel weird? Why does it not feel comfortable? It was fine at the last gig, it was fine at home when I was practicing, but just nothing is right. What is going on this time? I think this very problem occurs more often than we're willing to admit. And I found that more often than not, discomfort at the drum set can be solved by some simple kit adjustments. In other words, this seemingly huge problem can be solved with a simple discussion of ergonomics. Hey everybody, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. This is a channel that is all about giving you the tips and topics of the trade to help you become a better drummer by teaching you the skills that really matter. If that's you and this video helps you out, I really hope to earn your subscription. So our first core thing when talking about getting comfortable with the kit, we got to make sure that our throne versus kick placement, that relationship is right and comfortable. The general rule with distance between the kick and the throne is that we want to make sure that the angle between our upper leg and lower leg is 90 degrees or greater. From that guideline on, it's really up to personal preference, but that's kind of the general rule. You don't want a tighter angle than that or you will feel cramped. And in terms of throne height, it really depends a lot on the technique that you're using. I'm 6'3", but I actually don't sit that high because I'm a heel down player. I think that if you're playing heel down, it makes more sense to not sit super high. But if you're playing primarily heel up, it's probably going to make sense to be higher so that you're not raising up your right knee so you can play heel up, because that would feel unnatural. So those are just some things to think about based on the technique you're using. Make sure that you're comfortable and whatever you're doing feels natural to you. I also like to sit on the front edge of the stool instead of back on it. And really this is, again, a personal preference thing. I encourage beginner students to do that because it helps you sit up more straight, helps you have good posture when you're sitting on the front edge instead of on the back side where it's easier to slouch into it. And so that's the way I naturally sit at the kit, and of course that's up to you and however you feel comfortable at it. So once we've got the throne height and the throne placement right, we want to take a look at the snare. When we're playing rock stuff, which I'm sort of making the assumption here that most of what we're playing, what we're setting up our kit for is rock, we've got a lot of kick and snare. So we've got to get the kick and the snare comfortable because that's what we're playing all the time. I like to have my snare about 2 or 3 inches higher than my knee and tilted slightly toward me. I find that I'm able to play comfortable rim shots that way. I can just throw it on the stick naturally, hit a rim shot, or I can choose to not play rim shots and it's still very comfortable. I've also seen guys go the other direction with that, lower the snare a lot, then tilt it either flat or away from them. That way they're still able to whack it at that correct angle, but because it's tilted away, it doesn't matter that it's lower. So that's also something to think about. That leads us into talking about tom angles. We'll start with the rack tom. So we want to make sure that we're able to hit the tom square in the center, and we're not accidentally hitting rim shots or accidentally hitting the rim of the tom. But we also don't want to have it tilted so far toward us that we're actually not hitting it square on and the stick is glancing off of it instead. We don't want to glance off of toms. We want to nail it in the middle, let the stick bounce off so we're getting a full resonant sound. But in terms of height, let's say you've got the tom lower. If it's lower, you can go a little more flat with it. If you're going higher, you might want to tilt it more towards you. I actually like to have my floor tom a couple inches lower than my snare and tilt it a little towards me. So it helps ensure that I'm not going to accidentally play a rim shot on a floor tom and then my finger end up sandwiched between the stick and the rim. I like to have that floor tom sort of tilted towards me, toward the snare a little bit, so I can also go back and forth between the rack and the floor tom comfortably. That's a relationship that you want to think about if you're going to be playing a lot of fills around the kit. We want to have snare, rack tom, floor tom set up in a manner that we can go back and forth and play around it effortlessly. Let's talk about cymbal heights and angles now, because I think this is very important, because if we don't have our cymbals set up correctly, it's very possible that we're not hitting them right, which can be very bad for the cymbals, not to mention they're not going to sound good. Maybe you like your cymbals flat, maybe you like your cymbals angled a little bit, but think about that in relation to their height. When we hit a crash cymbal, we want to hit it with the stick roughly, maybe on the shoulder of the stick right here. That way we're able to hit it and glance the stick off. If we hit the cymbal way down here, most likely the stick isn't going to glance off as well. It's not going to bounce off the cymbal, and instead it's going to stay in contact with the cymbal, which is actually going to result in it not resonating and vibrating as freely as we want, because we want a good full cymbal crash. If I strike the cymbal roughly here on the stick, glancing it off, as I do it, I get a great full cymbal sound. The cymbal responds really well. So keeping that in mind, that's our underlying principle here. Keep that concept in mind and adjust your cymbals accordingly. For instance, if you like to tilt your cymbals, well, if we've got our cymbal tilted this way, we still want to be able to hit it at this angle. So that means maybe we've got them higher up so that we can maintain this angle and not be hitting them like this or anything else. But say we like our cymbals flat, well then it might make more sense to have them lower. That way we're able to come down at them like this and swipe them with the edge like that. It's just like with talking about snare angle and tom angle. If we're going lower, we might want it flat. As we go higher, we want to tilt things in toward us so that they're comfortable. Of course, one of the issues when talking about cymbal adjustment and where we've got our cymbals is cymbal bleed into the mics. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Let's talk about the hi-hat. So one of the big questions when setting up hi-hat is, do we prioritize what's comfortable for our foot, or do we prioritize what's comfortable for our hands? Because we end up kind of having to compromise and find a spot that works for our left foot and find a spot that works for our hands. I think that the same leg 90-degree rule applies to the hi-hat. You don't want to have it too close, but you don't want to have it so far that you're having to reach out to it. Hi-hat height is determined by what style you're playing, how loud you're playing. If you're playing quietly, you're probably going to be playing on top of the hi-hat, so it makes sense to have them lower. But if you're playing loudly, you might want to have them higher so you can play more on the edge like that. And that also frees up more space for your left hand on the snare crossing under. If you've got the hats higher and out of the way, then you've got more room to move that stick on the snare, and so your hands aren't going to get tangled up. That also helps move the hi-hats up away from the snare mic so that there's less cymbal bleed into that mic. So I like to find a sweet spot. I don't like my hi-hats incredibly high. I just want to be able to comfortably play at this angle, just like with the crash cymbals, so I can get a good sound. I can dig in a little more if I want to, but I can also glide along more smoothly if I need to. This is something that you've just got to experiment with. So keep an open mind with this, and maybe you're used to doing one thing, well, try something else, try moving it around until you find what's most comfortable for you and the way that you're playing. I mentioned cymbal bleed a minute ago. The benefit to having cymbals higher is you get them up away from the tom mics. A lot of times tom mics are guilty of picking up a lot of the cymbal noise during a groove. But if we can move those cymbals up further away from there, we're gonna get a little bit less of that, and we'll get less hi-hat bleed into the snare mic if we get the hi-hats up higher. Of course, we can only go so high, and we wanna have things lower and close together, so it's all about compromise again, but we wanna make the audio engineer's job as easy as possible. So I don't wanna complicate things more, but that's something else to think about as you're setting up. And hopefully you can maybe move mics around in such a way as to not pick up as much cymbal. Whether or not these 5 reasons are the exact reasons why you're not comfortable with your kit, I really hope you could learn something here from my experience and my input around these different adjustment points on the kit. In my personal experience, all 5 of these points have been huge factors in my comfort level behind the kit. And so I think they may be for you too. If you feel like you're having trouble with your kit, start with these 5 things. Start by getting the throne placement right, getting the snare right, getting the hi-hats right, and then getting the toms angled right, the cymbals right, so that you're able to get good sounds out of everything. That's the underlying principle. We want to be able to comfortably, naturally, smoothly get great sounds, employing great technique out of everything we're doing. Yes, this can take time and just a lot of gigs and a lot of practice sessions figuring out what is most comfortable, but be willing to experiment, be willing to try things, move things around until you're comfortable so that you're able to play music naturally behind the kit. So guys, as always, thank you for watching, and subscribers, thanks for subscribing to this channel. Thanks for watching my videos. And if you haven't subscribed, I really hope you will. I really hope this video helps you out and helps you get your kit more comfortable. So I hope to earn your subscription. As always, guys, thanks. Have a great weekend. I will see you next week.